Hello, everybody. Please find your seats so we can get started shortly. Hello, anybody already watching from home? Today, all of our teams are going to be presenting their lightning round games. So these are recreations of classic games made in a week by these teams. So be impressed. Yeah, clap.
Huzzah. Huzzah.
All right, Michael's going to start leading us in with our first team.
All right, so our first team, we've got, do you guys have a team name?
Just team one.
Okay, Team 1, presenting their game, a recreation of Robotron. Okay, go. Oh, right, thank you.
Hello, and welcome to our presentation about our game, Lost Yokai. I'm Olivia,
I'm Zev.
I'm Dylan.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Austin.
and our game is based off of Robotron. For context, our game is set in a futuristic Japan where a terrible earthquake and tsunami took many lives. So many lives were lost that the afterlife overflowed, and ghosts, aka yokai, descended down back to Japan, wandering around lost and afraid. The Japanese military was sent out to exterminate these ghosts, but our main character, ghost conductor Reiko, decided to use her special abilities to guide and gather these ghosts back to a new afterlife and travel across Japan fighting the military. Now here's our video demo.
Just like Robotron, our game consists of enemies being spawned in waves to attack the player. Each wave is predetermined, but it has a randomly chosen background and a unique yokai specific to each wave. To do this, we have a grid of squares that are pre-generated to each and every background, and enemies each pick a square to spawn in and then come in and attack the player. There's a circle around the player itself, which represents the space that enemies aren't allowed to spawn, which prevents any sort of spawn camping or early deaths for the player.
So collecting ghosts is a major part of our game. And so here on the far left, those multicolored ovals are our pre-interim yokai. And so as the player collects the yokai, the player will gain a special ability, and a little part of the ghost meter will be filled up, which is what the player uses to use their ghost ability. So post presentation, we added animations to each of those yokai, and the way we did that is we just changed the animator through script just to give the player some feedback on what yokai they're collecting and what ability they will be getting. And we also changed the player animation, and so this is our giant player controller. I like to call it the Tree of Doom. It was very confusing to figure out, but now the player will change animations in 8 directions, and the player's animation will change depending on what ghost power they are currently using. And I think it looks really good, and I'm pretty sure that we can all say we are proud of the animation and really the game as a whole.
Okay, so on the sound side, we actually managed to implement all the sound effects and background music on Monday, so the day before Interims. But for our game, we have 2 primary themes that play, so the title screen music, as well as a motif for battling. So like inside the battling scene, we have different motifs that change in instrumentation as well as vocal range, depending on the environment you're in. So on the next slide, I have an example of the theme that plays when we're in the cherry blossom environment. Okay, so that was like a short snippet of it. But for inspiration, I took inspiration from Zinnia's theme from Pokemon because it has a lot of dissonance, as well as the glass harmonica because I thought the reverb it gave had a really interesting like ghost-like feel, as well as traditional Japanese instruments because of our setting, which was in Japan. So I have, for example, the bamboo flute, the shakuhachi, the Japanese lute, the shamisen, as well as the taiko drums.
We believe that our research was really well reflected in our characters. For example, we have the Oni in the top right corner that gives the player an attack buff. On the bottom, we have the Teke Teke that gives a speed buff. We have the Kitsune that gives an invincibility buff. And we have the Kasaobake that gives a stun ability. And we have our character, Reiko, who is slightly based off of a Japanese train conductor. Something we struggled a lot with art was the animation and just the perspective because, for example, Reiko is in all 8 directions, and so we had to animate her in a shooting, idle, and walk, and especially in all 4 of her ghost modes. Before, we also were able to implement our title screen, end screen, and cutscene / tutorial, and they all reflect the narrative pretty well. Before Interims, all we had was concept art, and we had a little drone flying around the game, and we were advised to narrow down our scope. But after Interims, we were able to complete everything, and so we ended up expanding our scope, and we added all the backgrounds, characters, and additional objects and projectiles.
So for art specifically outside of these characters, we also have backgrounds, obstacles, as well as UI elements. So as you can see on the top, we have just a blue block, and that was kind of our background before Interims. But then after Interims, we had enough time to touch up and really create like different scenes and backgrounds for these different environments. So for example, you have like the cherry blossom environment on the left, as well as the urban scene on the right. And then for the obstacles, during Interims, we only had a little white triangle to denote like colliders where the players couldn't pass, but we were able to expand on that and like add hedges, stumps, etc. And at the bottom, the green block was our projectile for enemies that shot. And then we were able to expand that to change and vary depending on the entity shooting. And lastly, the UI elements. So primarily for this game, we had the red circle denoting lives that the player had, as well as a little slider for like a power meter. And we managed to touch it up to look like that on the left side during our final game.
When designing the enemies, we had to keep in mind the various different types of enemies that are present in Robotron. And we also had to adjust the enemy designs to fit the vibe and theme of our game, while also keeping the core gameplay mechanics. Because our game is set in Japan, we decided to include some of elements of like Japanese culture, such as these talismans that you can see on the side, because in Japan they're often used to ward off evil spirits, similar to like the ghosts in our game. And then here are some of the sketches that we presented for our interim presentation. As you can see the various different like perspectives of our enemy characters, like the drones and the humanoid characters. And then here are some of our finalized enemy character designs.
So something that could have went better was just our overall implementation, especially on the art side. We had a lot of trouble with Unity and Perforce. Something that went really well, as I said before, was that we were able to expand our scope and make just such an incredible game. We were really able to blend together our sound, art, and programming and make sure it was consistent and beautiful. I just want to say thank you to our amazing TAs and this amazing, patiently and hardworking group, and thank you for listening.
Good job, guys.
All right, and next up with their fantasy take on the game Joust, Team 2, the Jazzy Jousters, will present their game Brave Knight.
Hello?
Wait, this one is not on.
Is it this button?
All right, hello. We are the Jazzy Jousters, and this is our game Brave Knight. I'm Emily, I'm the producer and artist.
I'm Pritha, I'm a programmer.
I'm Jamie, I'm a programmer.
I'm Brogan, I'm an artist.
I'm Chuhan, I'm the sound designer.
So our game was Joust. Joust is a 1982 2D platformer game, and you play as a knight who's riding an ostrich, and you're trying to kill other enemy knights who are riding buzzards. As you go through the game, you're trying to survive and also collect points. While we were playing Joust initially and also watching videos of Joust gameplay, we noticed 3 core features that we really wanted to implement into our game. The first 2 are movement and collisions. So the movement of Joust is really core to Joust gameplay. It's incredibly, incredibly frustrating to use. So we really wanted that in our game. On top of that, the collisions, when the player collides with enemies, if the player is higher than the enemy will die. And if the player is lower than the enemy, then the player will die. The third and final core feature that we wanted to implement was wave progression. So as the player completes waves and kills all the enemies, the waves will get harder. The enemies will be faster, they'll be smarter, and there will be more of them. And you're going to see all 3 of these core features in our game demo that we're about to show you.
All right, a little bit about our brainstorming section.
So when we first wanted to conceptualize what we wanted to do with Joust, we really wanted to keep a few main themes from the game. Largely, the movement system, despite being awful, was really important to keep in the game because it's what makes Joust Joust. We also wanted to keep in the chaotic theming of the game because it doesn't really have a cohesive world-building scheme. It's got ostriches and a pterodactyl and a lava troll, and keeping that chaos with a unifying overarching theme was really important to our game.
Another theme that we really wanted to incorporate was mythical creatures, because thanks to one of our team members who really likes unicorns and sparkles, we decided to incorporate the alicorn, which is a mix of a Pegasus and a unicorn. We also incorporated some phoenixes as well as the kraken. In addition, here is how we created the player. So the player has its alicorn head pointing down, always to act as the lance. And this allows the player to attack other enemies. In addition, we have some concept art for the knight, and this knight, we experimented with different types of armor, and we stuck with the chainmail armor. In addition, this is some concept art of our backgrounds, and here are 2 images that we created from this piece of concept art. The first image starts from the sky, and it moves down to the bottom where the player will meet the kraken in the second image.
So while we were designing the enemies, we wanted to create something that was both mystical and magical, but also a bit creepy and spooky. So we took inspiration from these imps from the game Frosthaven, but also imported them into a sketch style for concept art, and then moved them into pixel art with them riding on the alicorns.
Here's a little on how we actually built the game after brainstorming.
So on the programming side, again, movement is core to Joust gameplay. So it's a very frustrating movement system. If you feel like you want to punch your computer after playing our game, we've done our job. The player, it's a physics and kind of momentum-based movement system. The player has 4 main movements. They can stand still. They can also flap. Flapping adds a small upwards force to the player, and you have to flap multiple times if you really want to navigate around the level and try and kill enemies. If you don't keep flapping, you're going to fall to the ground due to gravity. The player can also move horizontally, but this one is momentum-based. So if you want to go at your maximum speed, you're going to have to wait a couple of seconds to accelerate to that maximum speed. On top of that, if you try and turn around while you're going at max speed, you'll be locked into a skidding animation, which just really creates another obstacle that the player has to overcome. So all 4 of these movements, it really makes a movement system that the player has to perfect if they want to win this game.
In designing the enemies further, we wanted to create these alicorns that they would ride on, somewhat similar to the player that Emily had created. However, we wanted to ensure that the alicorns were a bit more spooky and gaunt, so we put bat wings on them and made them more skeletal and a little bit more, like, monstrous. We also made these macabre death animations that would kind of contrast the whimsical feel of the game.
On the programming side for the enemies, we wanted to make sure that they actually posed a challenge to the player, otherwise they wouldn't have to use the movement system. So first of all, there's 3 types of enemies. Each one gets progressively faster, and they also get smarter. The enemies have 2 default behaviors in their AI. They can move horizontally just across the screen with like a random flapping pattern, so that it's hard for the player to predict. And on top of that, they can also occasionally target the player. So they'll move towards the player, and when they're on relatively the same Y level, they'll try and get higher than them, so that when they collide, the enemy wins the joust. This kind of AI creates a real challenge for the player, and again, they have to perfect the movement system if they want to do well in this game.
Before the interim, we first implement sound effects that is related to the main feature of the game, such as the sound of movement and getting points. And also the sound of collision and spawning. So I use percussions like glocks and marimba to complete these sound effects to make them related high pitch, which is interesting and also matching our imaginary theme.
Now, a little bit on how we improved our game after we got some feedback.
So we have 2 main bosses in this game. First, we have the Kraken. The Kraken rises up from the water. It can spawn on either side of the map, and then it will rise to a randomly chosen height. The Kraken has a central eye that will constantly be following the player, and from that eye emits a light beam that will also be on the player at all times. It creates a really ominous vibe, and if the player hits it at any point, it will die, except for the eye where it's vulnerable, and player hitting that will cause it to die. The second one we have is the Phoenix. So the Phoenix is this majestic, beautiful creature that we want the player to respect. It was inspired from the pterodactyl of the original game, and it's really meant to be unbeatable and a pain in the neck and basically hinder you as you try to finish the wave. It uses an AI navigation package to constantly be moving towards the player to really make it difficult for you to clear the level. We have a number of special levels as well. So for example, this is the egg wave, where eggs are falling from the sky and the player has to go and collect them. This is good because they get a lot of points, but at the same time they have to be really fast because the eggs can hatch into really fast enemies. Next, we have the dark wave, where all the lights are turned off, and the only lights are from the player's horn, the enemy's horn, and of course, the Kraken. This adds a lot of ominous feels, and these different waves really create this variation in what could be a monotonous game.
So after intros, we wanted to improve the enemy designs a bit. You can see the evolution of the enemy alicorn here, and it came a long way from that beginning line art. However, there's a problem with these horses, and that's that these horses are emo. They have hair going down over their face, and it really conceals the fact that they're actually alicorns. And so we had to kick out those sprites and replace it with this, a decidedly not emo horse. This horse has glittery eyeshadow and is quite fancy, but also still is decidedly an enemy with its red eyes, bat wings, and more skeletal frame.
So when creating the platforms, this was our original design, and as you can see, it kind of blends in with the background. And in addition, the clouds on the top aren't really flat, so the player can't actually run on them. So thanks to Pritha's idea, we changed them to a pink color and we flattened them out. In addition, it has kind of a hot pink color to indicate a spawn point.
So the details are everything in a game. So after we added this contrast, we also applied some post-processing effects. For example, bloom to make everything glow this pinkish color, and chromatic aberration to give it a sort of pixelated feel. These in combination really give the majestic and fantastical type of vibe that we were looking for in this game.
We also add more music into the game, like the main background music. And by the way, I drew this title screen. So like I use classical instrument like harp, drums, piano, violin to complete this music to make it like classical, matching our theme, but also not very distracting players' attentions. And also there's enemy sound for the Krakens and also other enemies. So like this sound of egg hatchings and growing kind of increase the authenticity of our game by details, and also it matches our chaotic theme.
Overall, the game looked absolutely amazing, and we were really proud of how far we got.
But if we had a bit of extra time, we could fix a couple minor bugs. First of all, the enemies sometimes moonwalk towards you and kill you with their butt. Don't know. And also, some of the animations are a bit off. But other than that, we're really, really happy with this game, and we're so proud you guys could see it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, let's welcome Team 3, Beyond Perforce, with their game Beyond Hope, a recreation of Paperboy.
Hello, we are Team 3, and this is our game Beyond Hope. My name is Emily Zhang, and I am the artist/producer.
I'm Dee Dee Da, I'm the second artist.
My name is Cube McLean, I'm the programmer.
I'm Min Nguyen, I'm a programmer.
And I'm Matthias Olsen, and I'm the sound designer. We don't have the clicker.
So our game takes place in a fantasy world where the main game takes place in a small town which has recently been infected by a virus. And as you can see in the right GIF, there is a mage going around the town and healing the infected houses. Some of the houses have become dead or beyond hope and have been releasing undead spirits into the world.
And this is a quick demo of our game.
So you wake up to a tutorial that will only show once on your gameplay, and then the houses slowly show up, starting with the live houses and then the Beyond Hope houses. You cannot save any house that's Beyond Hope, so you have to watch as your house slowly turn into red and the game ends. You have 5 lives that regenerate every level, and if you die early, then you cannot save any more house, and thus you lose more alive houses. You also have a limited pool of mana that if you use all of them, you have to find a mana regeneration so you can heal more houses. You have to balance between scoring point at hitting the Beyond Hope houses and also healing your house, also trying to dodge obstacles. Sometimes you might have to sacrifice yourself just so you can clear the obstacles to get the mana you need to heal the house.
But our project was not always this beautiful game that you see before you now. Just 1 week ago, this was simply a concept, simply an assignment, the lightning round. And the game we were assigned? It's Paperboy, the 1985 arcade classic by Atari, in which you play as a paperboy, delivering your newspapers to your subscribers and brutally vandalizing the houses of your non-subscribers, all while avoiding deadly obstacles on the road and the sidewalk.
I had this idea of an unemployed CS graduate jumping off a building to deliver their job application to companies situated below. They vandalized the companies that rejected them, and in the end, got rejected by every company and landed in the dream job at McDonald's.
But eventually, we switched to a more medieval fantasy theme with a mage that's in a war, and instead of houses they target, it's allies in the war that they have to heal. But then our second idea was a mage fighting a giant, where each target was one of the giant's weak points. But eventually, we switched to the targets being houses, returning the classic Paperboy.
These are 2 books that we're really inspired by for our game art direction and also the message we want to share to our players. Essentially, the first book is The Plague by Camus, and the second is The Rebel. And in The Plague, the setting of the book is really similar to the story and lore of our game, where a town is infected by the plague, and the citizens have to face death and inevitable death each day. And we just really wanted to capture how Camus tries to encourage us to be courageous and face this death by choosing to rebel and live a good life despite it all. Yeah. And we really tried to incorporate this into our game lore by displaying this through scrolls in our intro and outro, and also creating a heavier mood and tone in our art direction to make a more cohesive world. Yeah. This was our concept art, and in the first 2 images, I really tried to capture that heavier mood by showing a really Hollow Knight inspired environment where the player is glowing in a dark environment.
So for the character concept art, I was very inspired by deer, as they're often seen as naive and very fast, which is what we were going for with the character. And then on the top right, you can see some concept art of our environment and obstacles.
Now, after completing our ideations, we began our first stages of development. Here, we decided to replicate the core mechanics of Game Boy, including the movement, projectiles, and the fixed camera angle.
I was in charge of the 3D art for our game, and our game is set in a 2.5D world where the background is 3D and character and enemy sprites are 2D. And these are some houses that we modeled, and we were really trying to capture that fantasy vibe and go for like a cottage look to make the world more authentic. Yeah. And this is the 3D environment I created before Interims without texturing. And I was really inspired by Elden Ring's cliffs, and I really wanted to like utilize that to capture a heavier mood, yeah. And this is the tree I made that was really inspired by the Whomping Willow from Harry Potter. And this is grass.
And then for the 2D animations, we were inspired by pixel art because it's very consistent and faster to produce. And then for the 2D still art, on the top two, there's some menu art. And then on the left, there's some UI art. And as you can see, we have 2 renditions of the house loading screen.
So we use a state management for the animation, and the player is just a box moving left and right, but it feels really fluid and like riding a horse because we have a variety of animation that smoothly transition with each other. We also have death animation and revive animation, so you can process how screwed up you are.
Now, as development started, I started working on the music, which I composed in FL Studio, and then once I was done, put everything in Fmod to put into the game. I originally sort of went for a more sort of generic fantasy forest type vibe, and then I made some magic sound effects, such as the casting sound effect and the healing sound effect.
Now, after finishing the first steps of our game, we did our interim presentation, which gave us some valuable feedback. First off, the biggest one we wanted to focus on was that the lore and depressing lore of our game didn't really match the gameplay that was really bright, as you saw here. So we changed the visual design and post-processing to make it a lot darker.
Post-Interims, I textured the environment, and I wanted to use more desaturated colors to make it look more authentic and capture that hopeless feel our game was trying to convey. Oh, yeah, and this is after texturing and lighting. I also added in the grass and the houses. Yeah, we added some red lighting on the houses to make it look scarier. And this was the bridge and lighting I created for that road in the middle, but it's a river.
For the interim game, we also have no feedback on when you hit something or whether your attack was effective. So I added this juicy particle effect that blows up stuff.
And then I also created a Firefly particle system that we added throughout the world to add to the ambience.
And then as we moved toward this more cohesive dark theme, I rewrote the soundtrack into this sort of more darker theme with a bass sort of inspired by Breath from Deltarune, having this sort of modulating, panning bass, which served as the core of the soundtrack. And then I made some more of the scary elements of the sound effects, such as this very scary ghost laugh, courtesy of my roommate, and a scroll sound effect for the menus. And then sound was effectively done.
We also want to have the player have a lamp in the darkness, but sometimes to add light, you have to add darkness. So we darken everything and make like a transparency shader graph for the player so that they can see a limited area around them to add to that scary vibe. We also have indication. Yeah, so that's what it looks like. We also need indication on which house you're supposed to hit, which one is the live and which one is the dead. So we have the yellow light for the live one and the red for the dead one. And as you play through the game, you feel more hopeless as house becomes red and the village was painted with blood. Then we also have +1 indication when you gain a score, so you don't have to look at the score every time you attack something.
Now the game is finished, but I don't think the process is. What can now we learn from this and take to our game round?
For workflow, we met up twice a day, every single day we worked on this project. And as you can see on the top right corner, we had a bunch of scenes and each were used for a different purpose. This allowed us to work more efficiently, and in case Perforce screwed up, it wouldn't mess up the entire game. And then for the moral of the story, first of all, is scope. Initially, we had an idea where we would make a cave to replicate the terrain part of the original game. However, we spent too long on the main part of the game, so we decided to scrap the cave part. And this would have all been solved if we start out with a more clear vision, which would be solved through better communication. And we learned that having better communication allowed for a better understanding throughout the team. So we had better communication post interim, and near the end we prioritized more efficiently as time was scarce.
So thank you all for listening, and I'd just like to shout out our mentor Jack for playing our game yesterday for 2 straight hours to beat my high score. Thank you all.
Now up next is Team 4 with Nuclear Kong, a recreation of classic Donkey Kong in a nuclear power plant.
Okay, hi everyone. We're Team 4. Our game is called Nuclear Kong, and it's based off of Donkey Kong. I'm Sophia. I'm the producer and artist.
I'm Kira. I'm also an artist.
I'm Jeremy, the programmer.
I'm Sahil. I'm a programmer.
And I'm Kevin, the sound guy.
Yeah, so this is our demo video. Yeah, so to go more into the actual story of our game, we decided that since Donkey Kong is about climbing a tower, we would climb a nuclear power plant instead. So you are a lab worker that has to climb this tower and defeat the evil boss of the company that owns the tower, and then pull this lever that will stop the flooding that is currently happening in the tower. So we had to decide which aspects of the original game to keep and also what to add, just because there's so many aspects in the original game. So we decided to keep the barrels just because they're such an iconic and recognizable part of the game. We also kept the dimensions of the screen because it really gives the player the feeling that they're climbing. And we also kept the format of having 4 rooms make up 1 level because that creates a lot of trial and error. Also, we added the rising water mechanic, which adds extra tension to the game. And we also added extra triggers like doors, like buttons and levers, which will unlock doors.
Okay, so we did quite a bit of concepting for this game. We have some of the preliminary stuff here. For example, we have the exterior of the nuclear power plant, as well as preliminary designs for the player character and some of the mobs. Here is more finalized concept art I did. I'm going to speak on the designs a little bit. The main character is bright yellow because everything else is dark and it makes for great contrast. This guy is kind of boxy and intimidating because he's evil.
Yeah, so these are some of the environment sprites that we made. There are the pipes that are the platforms, and there's also 2 types of barrels. And these are some of the weapons that the player can use, as well as the buttons and the levers, and there's also an animation for one of the barrels.
So here are the loading and title screens I did. They're supposed to kind of establish the player in the environment and also let you know what the stakes are if you lose. And I did some test animations at a larger aspect ratio because I'm not that familiar with pixel animation. These are how it turned out. And we also have a lot of other sprites for the player character. So we have jumping, idle, this is climbing, and these are front and back sprites for ladders. And we also have 2 types of enemies in this game more suited for nuclear power plants. So we have slimes
and rats, both of which have movement and dying animations. And finally, the antagonist, who has 4 animations, placing down a barrel, preparing to jump, and idle, and also walking.
Yeah, so on the left is the original tile map that we were going to use, but we changed it to be brighter to stand out against the black or the dark background. And you can see all the different types of platforms against the background here. We also have different drafts for the backgrounds, but we eventually just went with one. And to talk about the level design, I made a couple of the levels, and we decided to keep or be inspired by some of the platforms and their shapes in the original game just because they're so well known. So you'll see that this first one has a lot of slants, which creates a lot of different routes for barrels to take, which makes a really interesting composition. The second one is a lot more horizontal with horizontal conveyor belts. The third one is also loosely inspired by that picture on the right with the 2 elevator-type platforms in the bottom left-hand corner. And the fourth one is also a pyramid shape, and you'll notice that all of these give the player lots of different routes to take, which increases interest in the game.
Okay, for the programming side, one of the most important thing and one of the things that we spend most time on is the player controller. Since this is the arcade game, we want to make that like quick arcade feeling, so we increase the acceleration and the gravity of the player. And another very iconic movement of the Donkey Kong is climbing. This movement is also creating a lot of dynamic to the game. This is one of the early prototypes of the water system. It's basically reflecting all the things above the water and give it a distortion effect. And this is how it looks like in the actual game. Again, we want to create the arcade quick, fast-paced feeling. That's why the water is always increasing and chasing the player. And for the environment, 2 things that we are working on is some conveyor belt and the elevator, which also, as Sophia said, increase the route choice and the dynamic of the game.
So now it's time to talk about level generation. So originally our idea was that we'd make like 10 to 15 rooms per level, and then each level we would randomly choose 4 of them every time you play the game. However, we soon realized that's just way too many rooms to make, and we do not have time for that. So we instead decided we would handcraft each level with 4 rooms stacked on top of each other, like you can see on the right, where the top room leads to the next level. So here are our 3 enemies. We have our classic barrels that we knew we would add from the start because of how iconic they are in Donkey Kong. And then in order to replace the fire enemies from Donkey Kong, we decided to make rats and slimes because they fit the nuclear theme more. So first are barrels. Barrels are pretty similar to how they are in Donkey Kong. When they're falling, they fall straight down. If they hit a slope, they go down the slope. And if they hit flat ground, they go towards the player. Additionally, whenever they go over a ladder, there is a chance that they can go down the ladder as well. Then we have rats, which go left and right between the boundaries of a platform, and slimes, which also go left and right between the boundaries of the platform, but can also go up and down ladders sometimes. So originally, barrels were a lot more random, and then rats and slimes had a lot more complicated features in order to increase interest. But we realized that Donkey Kong is a game about simplicity and predictability. And so in order to make the game more simple and predictable, we ended up removing the randomness from the barrels and removing the more complicated features from rats and slimes.
As for the theme music, I tried to make a retro 8-bit vibe to try and match the original arcade design of the game. And also, I tried bit crushing nearly all the audio and further to improve the arcade vibe. As you can hear, it's also very rhythmic to emphasize the rhythmic nature of the game. And next, we also have the jump sound effects, which are abstract as the original are, but are different in that it's more subtle. And lastly, we also have walk sound effects further to emphasize the rhythmic nature of the game, as the original did not. And we have 6 different ones in order to introduce some variety to the game.
Now it's time for some final thoughts. So we were able to get a lot of features into our game, and we're pretty proud of that. We were able to get a lot of our framework done early, and we kept that productivity running through for pretty much the entire project. However, our project did run pretty victim into scope creep. There were a lot of features that we wanted to add that we didn't get to, and while we did work on a lot of framework early, we spent so much time on framework and not enough time on integration that a lot of our mechanics that we wanted to add, we never got to. And one last thing is that this was a lot of our first introductions to what is effectively a 9-to-5 job. And while it, while it was a lot of work, came out with a game that we're pretty proud of. So thank you all for listening.
We are now going to take a short break and resume presentations at 10:50. So, I don't know, get some coffee, get some water, use the bathroom.
Hello. Check, check.
All right, everybody, if we could funnel back into the RPAS, find our seats, get ready for the next presentation. Ricardo, could you grab that door, please?
Oh.
All right. Sky, could you close the door a little bit, please?
Can you guys squish back? It's like a little bit too far, I guess.
Okay, all right, quick programming note, advice from the tech people. The stream audio was a little bit quiet, so we needed to up the Windows volume. If you guys at any point need to adjust the volume, like on your presentation, use the touch screen under the keyboard, not the volume keys on the keyboard. All right, Sky, take it away.
Welcome back, everybody. First up, revamping the classic arcade game Asteroids. Here's Team Cannonberg coming in with a bang.
Boom, we're Team Asteroids. Our game we named the Seven Seas. I'm Jay, I'm the producer and an artist.
Hi, I'm Che, I'm the programmer.
I'm Desmond, I'm also a programmer.
I'm Carl, also a programmer.
I'm Cece, an artist.
And I'm David, I make sounds.
Okay, so what is Asteroids? Just a quick little overview. Asteroids is a single-player game in which you fly around as a ship. Your objective is to destroy aliens and asteroids as well. Getting hit by one of those asteroids, you lose a life as well as getting hit by an alien. You have 3 lives. You lose all 3 lives, you get set back to 0 and you lose. It's a wave progressive game over time, and your goal is to get as many points as possible. Here are some references if you want to take a look at the screen. We wanted to bring space to ocean and earth, so we decided to put it in the ocean, and we thought, what better to replace asteroids than icebergs? So we started off with some icebergs, and then we moved in. Why not do the Pirates of the Caribbean? So we threw that in there, and we had that little pirate theme going, and in here on the right, we have some rough sketches of our cannonballs and initial ships. So our core aspects of our game is I would say our player. It mimics the life of a real ship, especially when getting hit and destroyed, as well as our icebergs, along with our music and audio, which is very authentic and original to our game. Here's a video of our game. No audio. It's fine. All right, so authenticity. All members right here, all 6 of us decided to play the game. We wanted to understand the game mechanics behind the game itself, so we all decided to play it. We got our highest scores. It was a lot of fun playing it. And then we all went into our individual research to decide moreover on the visual aspects of the game.
So these are what the sprites and the art look like before the interims.
These are some other things that we did before the interims. For example, sprites that we would implement later, such as a splash, a fuse, and an end game screen.
And then we had interims. We got a lot of feedback on our overall our player movement, our physics, our real-life mechanics, as well as a heavy visual aspect in terms of the game.
This is some of the big feedback that we got, especially on the art side. It was way too bright. As you can see, straight from the coloring box, that guy is shielding his eyes because of how bright it is, and so we had to change that. So this is how we kind of went about it. We went to theming, we went to change the kind of color, shifted over, and so that the player would really feel like they're in a cold kind of environment that would fit the theme and mood.
So here's a comparison of our sprites before and after the feedback. We toned down the saturation and the brightness of the ice, so now it looks more realistic. We also changed the pixel size and resolution, so it wasn't like we were simply scaling down our sprites and creating these weird thin outlines. And we also darkened our ocean so that the player could see all the sprites on the screen. And we also changed our start screen so that it would fit an icy theme, and we replaced the desert island with this ice shard, and also changed the start and stop button so that now everything's blue and icy. Here are some visual effects we created. We added an explosion for the pirate ship's death. We also have particles for the collisions with the iceberg so that like these ice particles explode. And we also have a splash effect for the cannonball when it disappears and hits the water.
These are some other things that we did after the interims. As you can see, we had like 5 different wave animations. I went from 2 frames to 4 frames to 16 frames to 50 frames, and then I just changed it so it was an ebb and flow. We have 3 different sprites for the ships, as you can see, so it really looks like you're getting hurt as you progress. And finally, a fuse animation to play as there's a delay when you hit, to have more like realistic features for when you hit the cannonball and light the fuse.
So after we got all the art done, we want to go into some primary programming changes, and especially in terms of the physics and the hitting side, and we're going to head that off to Cheng.
Yep. Here you can see on the left-hand side, the animation. This is our player movement before the interim. This looks weird, I would say. So that's the reason that we also got feedbacks from our TAs, and we rebuild the code. We use frictionless material, and also we use different player movement scripts by making the player move seems natural and won't going backward. And this will fit player into the scene by making them more into the game.
So after we had our player movement down, we want to get in the hidden aspect. So we originally started with just some classic hit function. We made a public void, and we decided to make it so that when an iceberg runs into a player, obviously you lose a life. But then there was no visual aspect. You just lost a life, and there was no actual tone to the game. So then we had to incorporate that. We started off with some blinking and some iframes, which are invulnerability frames, and then we decided to get more in-depth on the whole blinking function.
So our primary goal is to make player really get into the game. We want to grab players' attention into the game to let them feel they are on the ship and fighting the pirates. So that's the reason we implement this hit pause function. And also I'm gonna pass to Carlos to talk about the screen shake.
Okay, so in order to make the player really feel the impact of collision, we made the camera shake animation. This animation will play whenever the player gets hurt. So by animating the position of the camera, we can create this up and down shaking effect. And another type of animation we made is a death animation, which will play right before the object is destroyed. Like for example, for this parachute, if the players cannot hit the parachute, it will explode before disappearing. So the explosion is a death animation of the parachute.
So after I modified the hit function, I realized the player goes a little bit wrong. The trail effect stick with the player, and it slides and it rotates with the player. It feels really bad, and that's the reason me and Jay work for entire afternoon to come up with this new trail effect to make it fit the pixel theme and also make it more naturally.
So moving on to sound, a little bit about the process. So I first composed music in a DAW, or digital audio workspace, which I use Ableton in this case. And afterwards, I implemented into FMod for better integration with the Unity projects. So for some inspirations, as you can see, Pirates of the Caribbean, it's a pretty obvious inspiration, as they're both sailboats and they're having battles on the sea. And here are just some clips. So there was a lot of orchestral music and composition behind it, but first let's start with some sound effects. So sound effects, when I designed them, had the main design idea of providing feedback to the player and to better immerse them in this ocean environment. So first off, we have an ice-breaking sound effect, and here's it in game. So I went with a 8,000 hertz to downsample it and make it more sound arcadey and retro styled. Moving on to the pirate sound effects. In the original game, when the UFO pops onto the screen, it blares an annoying
alarm sound all the time. So I changed that to a simple warning sound to let the player know that there's a pirate on the screen. And here's a game. And then moving on to ambience, to better emulate an ocean experience, I had a wave and ship ambient sound effect that plays in the background constantly. And now moving on to the BGM sound soundtracks, which should have played in the demo, but here you can listen to it. So that was the main menu music to mainly just get the player more interested into the game and not distracted from the main thing. And this is the main in-game music, and it has two sections. So the first section, as you just heard, will just play automatically in the background, but when the first pirate ship appears onto the screen, it will change to a more intense sound. And yeah, that will be all.
Okay. Thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you to the TAs for playtesting and giving us advice. Overall, the process went really well. Have a great day.
All right. Next up, straight from Crustacean Nation is a... They can hear me. We have a nautical take on the classic arcade beat 'em up Double Dragon, so give it up.
All right. Hi, we are Crustacean Nation, and this is our presentation for our game, Catastrophe Crab, an underwater-inspired recreation of the retro beat-em-up side-scroller game Double Dragon. I'm Aaron, the sound designer and producer, and let me introduce my team.
I'm Yulei, and I'm the artist.
I'm Nathan, and I'm a programmer. I'm James, and I'm also an artist.
I'm Sherry, another programmer.
I'm Walter, another programmer.
And this is a quick demo video of our game.
The strange colors in the water made me like this. Gert was more than a friend. He was a brother, a companion. But I was too hungry.
So through a series of happy little accidents, our art and music style turned out quite innocent and friendly, while our gameplay still managed to capture the gritty horror of the action arcade games of the time. So as a result, our crab is a bloodthirsty menace who can cut through swordfishmen like butter, but he's still a cutesy character to play, and the environment he's in is quite welcoming.
So, how did we get here from Double Dragon? Well, there were three things we wanted to keep in mind. First off, we wanted a unique combat system that the player could use. Second off, we wanted it to be derivative from the original Double Dragon game, so we decided to add an idea of animal transformations in our current game. And third off, we wanted to give a futuristic twist to it. Now, enter carcinization. This is the idea that eventually all living species will evolve into crab-like species in the future. So we decided, what if our game was in a post-global warming, post-nuclear meltdown kind of world where all living life, humans, animals, they've all turned into these crab-like species and other life forms in this ocean.
Right, keeping the aforementioned inspiration in mind, we created these, we merged the appearance of regular sea creatures with the likeness of human, creating these menacing but cute hybrid humanoid creatures. And so on the left here is our main character whose name is Eugene. In the middle and right are enemy models. During the later stages of development, we realized that the realistic textures that we were previously texturing the models with weren't really working with the style of the game. And so I implemented a cell shader to better help emphasize the cartoony look of the game and better help the game direction.
As for the background, if you look at the images, a lot of the cartoony rocks and kelp and stuff like that, I made a lot of those models and they were kind of inspired by SpongeBob. And also the conch and later stuff like that, they all went to ULing for texturing. And now let's talk about animation. So let's talk about the enemy animations first. So for the walk cycles with the swordfish man, I just used a normal human walk cycle. But then for the blobfish, I wanted to vary it up. And so I wanted to give it a waddle, and I used the penguins as a reference. I spent majority of my time on the crab animation since he is the main character. Before the interims, I had all the basic mechanics such as light attack, heavy attack, jump, and a walk cycle. But then after interims, we got feedback that we should focus more on the combat aspects. So then I added a bunch more attack animations, uppercut, the grab and snip combo, the spin attack, and then of course the dance, which. All right.
So, for the soundtrack of this game, I was particularly interested in exploring the contrast between the cute theming of our art as well as the darker aspects of the gameplay. Thus, I want to compose a song that leaned into that effect. I took inspiration, my main source of inspiration was the soundtrack for Super Mario Sunshine, specifically taking inspiration off of its bright, catchy melodies and its usage of artificial sound font instruments, which help invoke a feeling of laid-back cheerfulness. For the sound effects, I was also particularly interested in keeping them realistic to how you would hear them underwater. Among other things, this meant that most of the sounds in this game have some sort of water layer built under them. I was also interested, since the player and enemy also perform complex animations, in order to sync sound effects with them, I had to learn Unity's event marker system in the animator to call functions at specific frames. Here are a few examples of the sounds. We have player attacks, heavy attack, and the tornado move. We have player footsteps for sand and rock. And then we have the player and enemy damage sounds.
Programming for Catastrophe Crab was a lesson and challenge in scope. We evaluated what made Double Dragon. We realized that having an exciting combo or having exciting combat meant balancing challenging enemies and being able to move around.
That's why in our combat system, we focused on three main aspects. First of all, we wanted a multi-move deadly combination system that the player can use to attack. Second off, we wanted an environment that was conducive to incentivizing these attacks, where a player can also interact with items to make sure to enhance their attacks. And third of all, we wanted this combat system to be rewarding for the player to actually want to learn how to use the combos and when to use these combos.
The combo system is managed with an intricate web of animation layers and finite state machines to ensure that you can do multiple things at the same time. When you do an attack, multiple things have to be synchronized. The audio, when the hit is dealt, when the enemy is actually dealt the damage, and when the environment reacts to your movements. This required close coordination with everybody on the team to ensure that the game ran as smoothly as possible.
Due to our 1 week time constraint, we decided to scrap the idea of missions from the original Double Dragon game. So instead what we implemented in our game was continuous level generation to emphasize the replayability of our current game. So what continuous level generation is that every single time you play, the enemies you face next, the zone you're going to be in next, they're all going to be different, making every single playthrough unique, keeping the player continuously engaged.
And about the UI, there are 3 different types of UI in our game, which is the houses, score, and the scenes. The house is at the left bottom of the screen and shown by a house bar. And also, the score is a singleton, and defeating each enemy will give the crab 100 points. Additionally, if the crab can kill the enemy by combos, which is really cool, extra scores will be given. And also, we are really proud of our post scene, end scene, and start scene and their UIs.
On the art side of things, we had surprisingly few problems, but we did learn some lessons. So first of all, when we textured our everything basically, we did it after the animations, and that kind of made things a little weird. But in the end, that wasn't a huge problem. And also for me personally, when I was animating, sometimes the keyframes would get really messy, and sometimes I just had to start over because I just couldn't tell what's happening anymore. But in the end, that ended up being a good thing because the animations always turned out to be better.
Additionally, like I mentioned before, we realized that not every texturing style is fit for every game. And so we learned to keep the game direction in mind and communicate with everyone else on the team to make sure that we textured in a way that is fitting for everyone's vision of the game. And finally, of course, we learned lesson in scope because as artists, because we didn't face that many problems, we were planning on implementing so many more enemies and textures, but we left the programmers kind of like hanging because they were having so much trouble. And so here is a model that was never used that I had created.
Speaking of the programmers having problems, we experienced surprisingly a large amount of issues. For example, there was an issue where scaling an enemy up or down just a tiny bit would completely ruin the enemy navigation. It would tear the animation so they would go like 500 miles in the other direction over yonder. It was pretty bad, but we managed to fix it, and enemies now spawn in varied scale.
Overall, I'd say that working on this project taught us a lot of lessons about scoping, about planning, about team management. Thank you so much for watching our presentation. We enjoyed presenting this to you, and have a good day.
So the next team, okay, so the next team, they recreated the arcade game called Puzzle Bubble and transporting it to undersea. And let's dive in together with their game Fish Bubble.
Hi, we're Team 7. We were assigned the game Puzzle Bobble, the bubble popping game, and we remade it into Fish Bobble. My name's Hannah. I'm the producer and an artist for our team.
My name's Christopher. I'm a programmer.
My name's Eli. I'm also a programmer.
My name's Gray. I'm an artist.
And my name's Cooper, and I'm the sound designer.
A fish must protect their home. Spit bubbles at bubble clumps to prevent your home from being destroyed. That is the premise of our game. And so we have a short video demo to demonstrate that. Nope, you need to click it.
Okay, so as demonstrated by the video, our idea was to take Puzzle Bobble and turn it into a top-down game. And we will also have bubble clumps attacking the player coming from all directions. And then the player's goal would be to defend their tower at the center, as you could see in the video. Now on to the first phase of our game development process.
The first thing we decided to implement in code was the actual bubble clump logic. As you can see, the clump controller, which is the physics center of the clump, has bubble controllers under it, and each bubble controller has a slightly larger adjacency checker. For popping, when a player bubble is added to a clump, it calls the propagate function of the nearest valid bubble, which recursively calls the propagation function of adjacent bubbles until all bubbles that should pop know they should pop. And when that state is reached, they pop.
We then implemented inputs like player input using Unity's input system. So we have different inputs for player attack, movement, and then swapping bags. But the movement ended up going unused after the interims. Then we added a bag and a double bag system. The bag system gives the player a random sequence of all 6 bubble types when they want to shoot, so you don't have to wait potentially forever for a random bubble to show up because it's already in the sequence. The double bag system allows the player to swap between 2 different bags so they have more control over which bubble they're firing.
Now onto some initial art for our game. So we have the earlier tower designs that you could probably tell did not get used. On the right, we have the tile map for the environment, and on the bottom are just some quick animations for game over and for all the actions for the bubbles.
Then we did some character art where me and Hannah decided that we wanted to do an orange fish to contrast with the blue background. And so all of our background tile maps are blue, and so we decided to go with orange since that's the opposite color of blue.
All right, so we made a lot of sounds for our game, and we really prided ourselves over trying to reference the original source material Puzzle Bobble for our sounds. So these are all the sounds that we made in the first half of our development process, but I think the ones that stood out the most closely towards the Puzzle Bobble is our bad move, bonus points, and bubble pop sound. So here is an excerpt from the bad move sound from Puzzle Bobble. Compared to ours, which both have like that same mysterious and confused feeling. Now, here's Puzzle Bobble's bonus points compared to ours, which both have like that kind of twinkling feeling to indicate that you got those extra points. And here is their bubble pop. And ours both have like that kind of bubble dissipating feeling. I think it kind of sounds a little bit satisfying. All right, so we also tried to do the same process for our music composition. Yes, the score is an 80/4. I'm sorry, music people. That's basically illegal. But like, so here on the left is the music transcription, like a piano transcription for the Puzzle Bobble main track, which is called Let's Go to Pow Pow Island. And this is our track, which both have like that happy, bumpy feeling. And then here is ours from the middle. So here is the middle of Pow Pow Island. And this is ours. And they both have like that kind of like main synth going out throughout the entire piece. You can kind of hear like all those ascending notes in the background. Oh yeah, I'm really sorry about that. That's my bad, guys. 80/4. I was gonna make one for the end, but then my free trial for my software ran out, so that's unfortunate.
Okay, so then Interims happened, and we received a lot of feedback, and most of the feedback was saying that our game was losing Puzzle Bobble theme, and it was becoming closer to games like Asteroid. So to change that, we were told that there was too much movement, and so we reduced the movement by limiting where the fish could move. And then we were told that it was visually too busy, having the fish be able to move, have the bubbles moving towards you, and also being able to shoot bubbles at the same time. And so then we also told that the character was easily lost within the screen because all of the colors were becoming too similar, and then also the fish was too small. And this is an image of our whiteboard with all of the feedback on it and also all of our solutions.
Now on to making changes in the second half of our process.
There were some simple adjustments that we made that were mostly just parameter changes. For example, we removed player movement, increased the size of everything on the screen, decreased the queue length, added bubble rebound so that you can't just shoot bubbles you don't want off into the edge of the screen. They will now come back as single enemies. And we fixed the bug that made the UI too small.
We also had broader design goals. So one of our goals was to make the game kind of more strategic. And then a way we achieved that was by adjusting the enemy clumps to be more complex. Like as you can see, before Interims, it was just like 2 colors. It's pretty simple and small. Then after Interims, we made them a lot bigger, a lot more color groups. There's also a bomb in the middle, which will explode if you reach it and destroy a whole clump, like a whole bunch.
We also implemented a level system to decrease randomness. On the left, we have the level editor as it appeared to us, and on the right, we have what the player saw. As you can see, it stored whether you've beat it, whether it's still locked, and what your high score is, and we chose in what order what clumps would appear in each level.
Now onto some design changes. We made the environment darker, the fish brighter, and we also made a new tower. And then we also had time to make a tutorial.
Then we also made all of the play buttons, title card, and a menu animation.
All right, so these are some audios that didn't make it into the first half of production, but here we have our explosion sound for our mom. I think that did a pretty good job then, if it scared you all. Here's our destroy sound for our tower. You can kind of hear like the shells collapsing and like the sand being washed away by the water. And here is our damage sound. You kind of hear like that crunchiness of like the shells being broken. Dang, I'm kind of scared to play these now. That was kind of loud. All right, brace yourselves, I guess. This is our original tower hurt sound. Yeah, so like you kind of hear like a woody, crunchy aspect in the sound, but that's not really visible in the sprite anymore, so that's kind of why we took it out. And this is our swim audio. Obviously, you cannot swim anymore, so that's useless now. And we use the software called Fmod to implement our music, and our programmer, Eli, will talk more about that.
So we were able to, using Fmod, group all these sound events into these different mixer groups. So we have a group for music and then a group for sound effects. And then with those groups, I could like adjust the volume of them in-game with those sliders in the sound menu. I could also play and pause the music using different methods when levels start and stop.
So to summarize, our team did well in terms of communication and creativity, but we could have improved by taking a longer time for ideation and making sure we stick closer to the actual Puzzle Bobble game. Thank you for listening to our presentation.
So now, next is Team 8. Their recreation is the Gyrus, and it's all about space, but their game is all about, you know, trees and cars.
Hello, everybody. Our game is Chris's Crisis, and it's based off of Gyrus. So, I'm Daniel, the programmer and producer.
And I'm Chris, the artist.
I'm Alexa, the other artist.
I'm Noah, the sound designer.
I'm Alan, the programmer.
I'm Kimmy, another programmer.
Okay, start off with some background. So our game is based off of Gyrus, which is essentially a shoot-'em-up game where a player ship shoots at enemy ships. And it's in a tunnel style, so it simulates 3D with a center vanishing point that all the bullets go to.
So our main concept was inspired by a recent misfortune where a certain car was demolished by a 60-foot tall oak tree. But anyway, look, here's our concept art. As you can see, having a car drive on all sides of a tunnel isn't very realistic, so we decided to set this in the player's nightmare.
Okay, now we're going to go into our
actual gameplay. Gameplay. The player is driving through an endless tunnel and has to shoot at trees and defeat them while collecting power-ups to help them survive. Ultimately, the goal of the game is to survive the night for as long as possible.
Look, I'm just going to issue a trigger warning for anyone named Chris in this room. But this is our demo. Okay, now we'll start introducing our beginning assets, starting with
arts. So first, you can see that this is the start screen. Chris is driving on a really creepy road, and there's a giant tree monster waiting at the back screen. And then I want to make the in-game background animation. So I want to let the animation to constantly changing to increase the immense. So I created 13 different loops, and at the right there's a chart for reference for the programmers to tell them how they should be connected to each other. And then there are car animations. At the upper left corner there are the car sprites, and at the right there are light sprites. And the GIF is how it should be look in the actual gameplay.
These are the projectiles I made for the game. They're both branches because it's trees. So that's what they look like in game. You can see that they're spinning and stuff. Fun. I then made 2 enemy variants. One of them's an oak and one of them's an evergreen. They're like that. They're hexapods because that's the only way I could think of where it would allow them to move that smoothly and that fast. So that's the motivation.
Now I'll introduce some of the initial sound effects for our game. These are some player sound effects. And then these are some enemy sound effects, which I tried to give like a ghostly feeling. These are some non-diegetic sound effects, which are basically sound effects that don't exist in the environment. And then for the music, I wrote the start screen BGM, and Alan wrote the in-level BGM. I had a focus on like a creepy vibe and just setting the scene, and Alan had more of a focus on intensity.
And now, for programming, we first started on basic gameplay, such as player movement, enemy movement, and shooting.
Okay, so the polar coordinates is the basis of our game. So we made a component that basically converts a combination of a radius and an angle into the original Unity transformation. So it makes us easy to do all the transformations. And also for the enemy behaviors, we've also implemented 5 phases in total, so it makes sure that it is similar with the original game gyrus.
By the way, the enemies are all customizable, so we can just reuse the code. And finally, although the squares and triangles are amazing, but our artist made extremely good assets, so we implemented the animations into the game with finite state mapping, and that's the one for the random background. And halfway through our production, we received some feedback, and essentially it said that our background music for the game didn't really match with the other sound effects. The background felt a bit too boxy compared to the circular tunnel we were trying to portray. And the attacks were hard to see. And as the enemies grew smaller, we lost a lot of detail. So after Interims, we focused on addressing this feedback and adding more gameplay features. Starting with
even more arts. So according to the feedback, our tunnel doesn't look circular enough. It looks kind of boxy. So I added these signs that you can actually see on the road to imply that you're driving on the road. And I made them to bend in a circular path to enhance the perspective of driving in a tube. And then we have, oh no, the end scene. Like your car is unfortunately being pierced through by a giant tree.
I then worked on a level of detail system, which involved creating 3 different sprite sheets for each of the variants. So the original level of detail, the largest one, is the one that we originally had, I guess. And then I created 3 more, so the medium one has slightly less detail and a thicker outline because it's meant to be used at a smaller scale, and the last icons are even simpler than that. This is a mock-up of how it's meant to look in-game, and then I did the exact same thing for the oak tree. You can also see the mock-up there. I then went on to make projectile for the car, which is a fireball. And after that, I worked on the boss. That's how it's animated, I guess. The flats image was on the previous slide, but this brings me up to 47 fully rendered and painted frames total.
We also had to adjust some of the sound effects. So one of our main challenges was trying to match the music with the vibe of the game. And what we decided on was actually creating 2 new soundtracks, where one was the in-level BGM, which fit the vibe more, but then we also had a boss-level BGM
to create a higher intensity feeling. And then we also had to adjust some sound effects because we changed the projectile from a bullet to a fireball, and you can see the progression here. And finally, to tie everything together, I did some mixing and I created some snapshots so that the game sound effects wouldn't be playing when the game isn't running.
And for programming, although we didn't have much feedbacks, we just added more gameplay features. So to start off with, we added more graphics. So first, we replaced the green dot that we had for lives with a small car. And finally, we added the wave details and the road details to the road background. And this was particularly challenging because we had math for some reason, because the scaling of the road as it moves back towards you, it wasn't linear. So I had to plot every single point and regress it exponentially to find the perfect equation so that it doesn't look off when the details are moving towards you.
Okay, moving on to enemy behavior. For added variety, we added 2 new phases called Surge and Retreat, which basically allow the enemy to move forward towards the player and attack, and then move back to its original position. Also, we slowed down the movements to improve enemy pacing and fixed some spawning glitches. Now that we had a good idea of what our levels were going to look like, we implemented a system. So each level is an hour, and each hour contains 3 enemy waves. And on every 3rd hour, you'd encounter a boss. If you don't defeat that boss within 30 minutes or before 3:30, it's game over. And if you win, you move on to the next level, and the life cycle continues.
And also to improve the variety of gameplay features, we also implemented 2 different pickups. The one on the left is a speed up pickup, and the one on the right is the hailing pickup.
And finally, as mentioned before, we just added a boss to have more gameplay variety, and it just essentially spews enemies outwards.
So for our final thoughts, as you can see in the concept art, we were actually planning to add more barriers to restrict player movement, but that was just one of the things that we did not have the time to do. If we had more time, we would have added more enemies and variety in their movements, as well as more levels.
But overall, as you can see from the screenshot, it wasn't really much different, and I'm pretty satisfied with our end product, and I'm sure all our team members are. And thank you.
Okay, we're going to take another short break and then start again at 11:44 to presentations before lunch. All right, if everybody could start funneling in so we can get done before lunch starts. My only instruction for creating the schedule for today was that we not cut into lunch. Melanie, could you grab that door, please?
Remember, guys, stand in the light. All right, and whoever's speaking, come to the center.
Yes. Aisho, you're over there.
No, I'm first.
Yeah. Yeah, so just
No, but whoever's speaking, come to the center. I'll go to the side after I'm done with my part.
I need a mic.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Team 9, and they also have come up with a pretty great game inspired by our very favorite director, Chris. So I am going to let them take it away on their take on Centipede.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. So our game is called Centy Circle. It is our take on Centipede. This is everything that we'll be covering in our presentation today. But before we start with the presentation, I would like you all to meet the team. So I'm Ishil. I'm the programmer and the producer.
I'm Oliver. I'm also a programmer.
I'm Tristan. I'm also a programmer.
I'm Ansha, and I'm an artist.
I'm Melissa. I'm also an artist.
I'm Frederick, and I'm a sound designer.
So before we get into the game, so let's talk about the pre-interim design choices first.
So we start by asking what if Centipede happens in a circle. The original arcade game Centipede happens on a traditional XY plan, and we decided to replace that by a polar coordinate system. Instead of having the enemies descend from the top, we have it like spiral inwards from all directions.
Okay, our team goal was to create a game that reflects the original while also introducing this idea of the paradox of time, which is the idea that although culture continuously changes, it will always remind us of the past.
So now here's a demo video that we've created for you guys. So here's our title screen. You can click play, it'll play the animation. And now we go into our main gameplay. So we can see Chris is firing out his musical notes at the centipede, and as he's shooting the centipede, it's dividing into more and more centipedes. You can see the flea is coming out randomly, trying to spawn more mushrooms, and if he hits a mushroom, the mushroom will also like break a little bit, and if a part of the centipede dies, it also turns into a mushroom. And after a certain threshold, it'll start spawning spiders that'll come directly to the center to try and kill Chris. And here's our end scene. So now let's talk about the divisions of our game. So first, let's begin with art.
So based on the time travel theme we have, we designed the clothing for the character based off different fashion from different time periods. Can I please have the next slide? And after the interim, we add more animation, including VFX, and more player animation, including the defeated scene. And this is the opening scene we designed for our game. We test to have the opening scene tied more closely to our time traveling theme and pop culture. We're experimenting with different color palettes. And finally, we decided to use purple as our main color to create more appealing visual pop effect.
Okay, so these are some of the mobs that we designed. On the top, you can see that we began with like a rectangle design for the centipede, but that didn't work very well with the code, so we changed it to a circular design. At the top, we can also see some of the flea designs that we did for the various eras. And you can see like the evolution of the spider. At first, it kind of looked like an ant, but I looked at more references to get a better version. And we can also see some scorpions and some mushroom designs. This is the main UI for the game. This is the death UI. And this is the evolution for the background. In the beginning, we did like a pixelated version, but that didn't differentiate well with the mobs. And so we changed it to a more pixelated version, but that had too much like contrast. And so I desaturated it and came up with that version. Now moving on to programming.
So for starters, let's talk about the interim feedback that we received. So firstly, we realized that the game is not about the centipede itself, but more about the mushrooms, because the mushrooms are the things that control the centipede, because they're the ones that can direct its control and move it faster to the player. And so it's part of many of the strategies, such as funneling the centipede to maximize your score. So to combat this, we added way more mushrooms, and we also added more mechanics with the mobs, such as the flea spawning mushrooms and the spider deleting the mushrooms. Next, we had to work on the control, because it was kind of unclear where the centipede was, and our layering system wasn't really good. We only had a few layers that needed to have both the centipede and the mushrooms. So we made a brand new layering system, which had way more layers, and we could control the spacing between them. And these layers also coincided with the rings on the vinyl record, so that the player had an idea as to where the centipede was and could track its movement and predict where it's going easily. And for the third thing, while this was not explicitly told to us, we wanted to add all the errors and animations that we had planned from the beginning.
So for the programming part of the process, we first started planning what game objects we really wanted, like our centipedes, our spiders, our players, and then we started making managers and controllers to really encapsulate all the features of them. Then we moved on to animating, which is implementing what our artists created into Unity using the Unity animation system. And then finally, we really connected them all together into a fully fledged game object. For our scenes, our title scene, we really wanted them to know how Chris really got into the disc. As you can see, he's pulled into the black hole, which teleports him into the past, which is our theme. And then finally, for our game scene, it's red and it's dark, which is eerie, and it happens after the last frame, after the character died. And then some challenges when it came to programming, I feel like we had some lack of communication and some lack of comments, which made it hard to understand each other's code. And then for the error switching, we really just had not really enough time to implement it.
So I'm going to talk about the sound design. So after the interim, I've been kept on working about music for different eras. So now I have 4 different pieces. The interesting music, the rock and roll, the hip hop, and the electronic one for 3 different eras. So first I'm going to talk about the interesting. So I gain inspiration from the interesting from Persona 5 and just to break down all the instruments from the music and try to rearrange them. So besides that, I've tried to get inspiration from many other pieces. For example, I got the inspiration from the old time kind of this kind of music for rock and roll, and also the musicians like Nujabes and Yuyama Hiroto. Also, I'm also inspired by the soundtrack from other games, and this is the soundtrack from Honkai Star Rail. And for the SFX, these are the sound for Chris attacking. This is for the guitar, and this is for the DJ kit. And these are the sound for the centipedes, spider, and this is Chris dying. Alright, and this is a F-mode project. You can see it. I've incorporated many similar sound to one specific events in order to play them randomly when the player is playing the game, and that can avoid the repetition in the game.
All right, so now that our 1-week lightning round is over, it's important to reflect on what was our original task. So our original task was to create a parody of the game Centipede, and we had to create some sort of change from the original game. We were quick to jump on an idea of changing it to a circular graph, as you saw in the demo, But unfortunately, that was our main oversight because we didn't really think about in the entirety how changing to a circular graph would actually change the game dynamics, techniques, and also the strategies that actually define the game. We first looked at the game and said, wow, this game looks incredibly simple, let's just make it. And then we started making it, did our interim presentation, and realized, wait a minute, this game has so much strategy to it that we kind of overlooked, and that's what we sought to try to fix, which is why we changed, added more layers, changed how the enemies worked, implemented more mushrooms. And here's a few things that we could have done to help our process, whether we chose the circular graph or not. First, we should have spent more time learning how Centipede actually works. Yes, we did look at this game right here and said, wow, it's just a ton of mushrooms on a black screen, that's gotta be easy. We didn't spend enough time actually testing out the game, playing it, and being like, wow, okay, we should probably understand how the programming works for this. And that also would have helped with our assets, specifically with the art, and connected to that, pre-planning game mechanics and design to help prevent incompatible assets. As an example, our original mushroom design was like a rectangle, and it just didn't work on the circular graph. It was kind of hard to tell what they were, and when the centipede would run into them, it would phase through sometimes because it was that shape. But despite that, we still completed almost all of our original goals that we set when we started this challenge. We finished all the entities and their AI. We finished the player movement to the way that we wanted. And of course, we finished all of our art assets, music and SFX, imported them in-game, and got them working. Thank you.
And now, right before lunch, let's interest our sweet tooth and check out Team 10's sweet interpretation of Burger Time.
Hi, we're Team 10. Our game was Burger Time, and we have made Cake Time. I'm Kaden, the producer and a programmer.
I'm Isabella, another programmer.
I'm Jenny, the sound designer.
I'm Harry, an artist.
I'm Kai, another artist.
I'm Sam, programmer.
So let's start out with showing a demo of our game. We had to speed it up a bit. We were struggling to get in the time.
So we first began our process of brainstorming, but decided which key features we wanted to keep from Burger Time. So we wanted to keep the burger mechanics, so our layers react to players stepping on them by staggering, and when they're fully staggered, they start to fall. We also implemented the enemy stun mechanic, but instead of using pepper spray, our player uses juice, which replenishes after each enemy kill. Enemies still die when a layer falls up onto their head from above. Finally, we also kept a very similar level style to Burger Time and kept the original end goal of completing 4 stacks at the bottom of the screen to win. Our plan was to continue the theme of food, so we decided on desserts, and we eventually settled on cakes for more visual variety and clarity.
For our concept art, these 3 are the enemies we created. This is a strawberry spider, a blueberry bird, and a dragon fruit, which we cut for simple animations. And then here are the 5 color schemes we chose, and in the end we chose the one on the bottom right here because it just looks more appetizing and fits the cute theme. And here is the cute player character we designed. And here is the player character's idle animation, its walk animation, and its climb animation. Sorry, it squished a bit. We made 7 animations in total for a player character, and we decided to showcase these 3 in particular because walking and climbing are the 2 key verbs we give to our players in order for them to finish the game.
This is our title screen. Initially, we had a little bit of difficulty finding inspiration for what it would look like, But that inspiration came to us by looking at, trying to find a contrast between the cutesy baking like pink theme with a more violent, aggressive, alternate cover art for another game, and that other game is Doom.
The music is also supposed to represent this contrast, by the way, if you couldn't tell.
This is our cake. We kept the lighter, more playful color palette here. Of course, being a game about making cakes, right? The setting is in a bakery or kitchen, and the wall tiles are meant to be like that, with more of like a cooking, baking, and cookie dough on the walls. And all the platforms are like cabinets and appliances that you'd find in a kitchen. And our juice gauge over here is inspired by jars and other measuring items that you would find in a kitchen.
And we then combined these art assets with this level we designed, which was inspired by an easy level of Burger Time. And here it is implemented into Unity.
So this is from a game called Celeste, which is like Cake Time. It's also an 8-bit game, and the track that's playing right now is called First Steps. So when listening to this track, I really liked the general uplifting, inspiring vibe of the scene. It has a very, I'm gonna go do something, I'm gonna go on an adventure sort of feel. So I wanted to replicate this same sort of feel in the main theme of our game Cake Time. And this was the end result of the main track of Cake Time. As you can tell, there's a very similar sort of vibe of, I'm gonna go achieve something, I'm gonna go make a cake. But one notable difference is that it's a lot more 8-bit, it's a lot more retro-y, and that's supposed to reflect its homage to a popular arcade game.
The player movement could be controlled by either W, S, C, and the arrow keys. Those white rectangles on the right side are the letter layer and the letter models. When the player hit one letter model, by pressing W and S, the letter could get the player's X coordinate and set the X to their letter own X. So the player would just directly snap on the letter. It works similarly for the yellow ones, which are the ground layer and ground model. We took advice from the Interim to make player movement smoother and snapping easier. So we slightly increased the size of the letter model, so you can see it is slightly bigger than the tile map.
And then for the player footsteps, I used raycasting to differentiate between the different platforms, such as walking on like the cupboards versus the cake platforms. As you can tell, the second one is a lot squishier. It's supposed to replicate sort of walking on a sponge versus walking on cupboards. And then that's a big contrast in compared to the ladders, which has a lot more of like a woody effect.
Another important piece of player movement was adding triggers in the player's feet, which are highlighted by these yellow boxes. As the player walks over each layer, pieces of it stagger depending on how far along it goes. Having one foot trigger will make a half stagger, and after walking fully over it, the player will fully stagger the thing, as seen in this gift in the top. After all pieces of a layer are staggered, it then triggers Izzy's cake falling scripts.
Our cake falling scripts are triggered by 3 colliders on each cake layer, which control its interactions with other cake layers, platforms, and the player itself. When a cake is hit by a above from another one or fully stepped over, it staggers and falls onto the next platform, and this movement is controlled by a raycast. These cakes can also trigger chain reactions to any other layers directly below them, causing them to fall as well. Ultimately, these cake layers will fall into a plate at the bottom to form a full cake, and when the player completes all 4 cakes in the level, they win.
There's also a sound effect each time a layer falls.
So for the enemy designs, here are the animations we made for the strawberry tarantula. As you can see, there are very many eyes and legs, so it was very difficult for us to animate. So when we moved on and made our blueberry bird animation, we changed the design to make it an octopus, so it's animated more easily, and we made it more friendly shape language. So that was how we were able to keep our animations in scope.
Another aspect that we took from our interim presentation was the feedback of smoothing and polishing up aspects of the game that we had. The enemies move using a node map, as shown by these blue dots in the first image. These nodes are used so that the enemy is able to find its position relative to the player, calculate which direction to go, and then go to that node in that direction. Should a node in that direction not exist, it will switch axes and go to the other one. Also, in this gift to the right, is the player using the juice to stun and slow the enemies. After being hit once, an enemy will be slowed, and the second time, temporarily stunned.
So there are two different end scenes. There's the win scene and then there's the lose screen. So for the win screen, it's a little bit soft, but the general vibe of the jingle is supposed to be very triumphant, very satisfying, like, oh, I achieved the end goal. I did it. I made the cakes. And then for the lose screen, we want something a little bit more comedic. There is a laugh in there, I promise. It's actually from one of our TAs, Ian. So.
And then our end screens both have the score displayed and also a button for better navigation through the game.
Our team faced a lot of extreme software issues with both Perforce and Unity, which caused us to have multiple days of work deleted. Despite this, we were able to become more cautious, such as creating a Google Doc with all of our scripts that we constantly update as a safety measure, because as the title says, we're not taking any more chances. We also had to re-implement many systems after they got deleted, which gave us an opportunity to implement improved versions, such as the enemy node map and having the cakes fall using raycasting. We learned a lot from our mentors about how to use Perforce and how to problem solve when in tough situations, both of which will be very beneficial for our next round. Finally, we still managed to maintain good pacing and communication within our team by completing many of our readjusted daily goals. Thank you for watching.
And special thanks to the TAs Jing, Jack, and Leah for helping us with all our technical issues, especially Perforce.
Okay, we're now going to break for lunch. We're doing the normal lunch schedule, so if you get first lunch, please step outside, and the rest of you guys, please wait in here so we don't overwhelm the hallway. Thank you. And then we'll be back in here at 1. All right, everybody, if we could funnel back in, find our seats, please. Jing, can you close that door? Thank you, Derek. You get Jing's pay for this hour now. Yeah. Well, might want the presentation, huh? Okay, all right. It is 1 o'clock. We're gonna finish this up with the last 4 presentations. First, Ian will introduce his team.
And now with a cool take on an old classic, Dig Dug, Team 11's Gary Doug's House Defense.
We are Team 11. I'm Ezra Bierman, the producer and programmer.
I'm Advik, a programmer.
I'm Yunhu, I'm a programmer.
I'm Laura, I'm an artist.
I'm Tanya, an artist.
And I'm Derek, the sound designer. And we made Gary Doug's House Defense, a game about a cranky old man who's finally had enough of the local pranksters. So, Gary Doug's House Defense is a reimagining of the classic arcade game Dig Dug, and we made this short gameplay demo to let it speak for itself for a moment.
Darn kids! Who raised these kids?
So we're the programmers, and the first thing we saw was the menu, so I will explain that. So we wanted to avoid a basic 2-button menu, so we decided on a 4-planar rotational menu. And it was heavily inspired off Pizza Tower, Kevin Cart, and Dr. Robotnik's Ring Racers. And you can see the cool animations over there. That is a shader that I made. And shader graphs, I made 3 shaders for this. The CR2 shader, which is a full screen shader, post-processing effect, and the menu shader. And it basically warps the image into different animations. So I would like to explain to you all how this all works, but unfortunately, it consists of like 20 different subgraphs, so it's gonna take too long. Anyway, what we did was we took the 4-player menu and we put some shaders in and textures in, and we made this into a lively menu that we have right now. And I'll pass it on to Ezra.
Thank you. For the gameplay design, we used this idea of authentic jank, which is that the imperfections in the game is what makes it feel more like a classic arcade game and makes it more fun. So for example, for the enemy behavior, we considered using a pathfinding algorithm like A*, which would make the enemies perfectly chase the player, but we found that it would make the enemies too smart for a classic arcade game and wouldn't be that fun. So we instead used our own system made of a simple state machine that would have the enemies sometimes chase you like smart and also sometimes act randomly. And so this would create both moments that are intense with the enemies cornering you and funny as they randomly walk in circles. Another part where the idea of authentic jank came in was with the player movement, which Advik designed and can describe.
Right, so on the left here, you can see our original player movement, which was super rigid. You know, you could only snap to the center of a grid, and you couldn't be in between blocks, which, you know, sucks. So after a bit more tweaking and refining, we ended up with what you can see over here on the right, where the player doesn't snap to the center of a block on a grid. They can move in between, and it just feels a lot more closer to the original Dig Dug. Something else that was very important to us was the player speed. So we received a lot of feedback during interim presentations that the player was moving at speeds way faster than an 80-year-old man should be capable of. So we decided to workshop on it, make the enemies faster, make the players slower, and so now there was a lot more tension between the two, and chases were a lot more exciting.
Okay, so now it's the art part. So first of all, for the background, we started off with some concept art, and then we made many variations of the snow tiles, and we tested them to see what would look best in the game.
We also add many decorations, such as plants covered with snow because it's a winter day in February, and also like the house where Gary lives and fans. We want to make the scene more colorful and energetic.
Next, moving on to the main menu. After interim presentations, we received some advice, and we experimented a lot with the color and saturation, so we could make the interior feel warm, but the entire scene still feel a bit like winter. Here's the animation that plays when the start button is pressed. It basically introduces the inciting incident that leads to the snowball fight. And then here are some other scenes for our settings. And designing the main menu was especially important because we had to tell the backstory and also set up the game.
Okay, now it's sprite evolution. Like for both the player and enemy, we draw some concept first. As you can see, there are various versions. And then we choose an old man to be our players because it's more interesting and there is more contradiction within it. And also, we first have a rough 19.6 pixel version, and then we improve it to be a cleaner and more refined 32 pixel version. And thanks to our teammates' suggestions, we use Mario as reference, and we learn different ways to convey details through pixel. Because this is the first time Laura and I tried pixel art, which is a huge challenge. And also we changed the sunglasses to a teasing-looking eyes, which Gary has more emotions. And for the kids, we revised the first few version to be more cheeky, so we can promote the empathy towards the old man instead of the kids. We also delete the kids' eyes because we want to convey less detail and also make it more mischievous. And here are some variation of the enemies. The colors are applied to differentiate between the player and enemies and enemy types.
Okay, now we're going to talk about the animations. So after interim presentations, we received a bit of feedback and we exaggerated the head bobbing and the walking motions. Additionally, we also revised the kid being defeated so the player wouldn't feel too bad. And then here are some of our other animations. One challenge we had while animating was creating consistency in the actions between the characters. So to address this, each action was animated by one of us only. Now I'll hand over to Derek to talk about sound.
Okay. So for the sound, the first thing I did when I got the game was go through a bunch of videos on YouTube watching how the music in Dig Dug works. And something I found was that Dig Dug has a very unique feature in that the music replaces the footsteps in the game. And so whenever the player is walking, the music plays, and whenever the player stops, the song also stops, as shown here. Oh, wait, it's not gonna work. Okay. Unavailable. Well, moving on. The sound effects were also a little hard because snow is a very quiet sound and also very hard to record online. And so I kind of had to adapt to that. And so using a lot of kind of weird sounds that you wouldn't expect in a snowball, for example, a fire sound, cars, a baseball hitting, and also me shaking my pillow. To create something that actually does sound like a snowball. And then next, because after the interims, we kind of finished all the music and sound effects, we had an extra day to kind of work on something else with the music and the sound. And so we got our mentor, Ian, to record a couple of voice lines. And although, in retrospect, these were a little rushed because we only had a day to implement them, the ones that we did implement did add a lot of kind of life to the game, as shown in these clips.
Kids these days. That'll teach them. Hey, that's not nice.
Yeah, thank you.
So during development, we faced a number of challenges, and while we did eventually overcome them all, had we known more about them in advance, we would have faced them very differently. For example.
For example, for art, one of the challenges we faced is there was a lack of references. For example, the hat bobbing in the snow, we couldn't find many references, so we had to mostly rely on our imagination and some logic.
And another thing is about pixel consistency. As Guy suggested, we should use a larger number of pixels to draw first and then impart to Unity, so that when we resize it, each pixel won't be larger compared to others.
Another challenge we faced was distance communication. Originally, we wanted to work on the game entirely in person, with everyone meeting together all the time for developing, but we quickly realized that wouldn't really work, since about half of the time we spent developing the game would be outside the ETC, where we could all be in the same room. So we shifted gears. We used Slack for communication and a version control tool called Perforce for synchronizing everything. And skipping the details for brevity, Perforce has some oddities with it that, had we taken time to learn more about the tool in advance, we would have been able to develop much more efficiently.
Lastly, with sound, we added it way too late into the process, which came with two huge issues. Firstly, sound just adds a lot of life to a video game, so by adding it super late into the process, we didn't get a good idea of how the game felt until the very end. And secondly, it is a lot harder to add sound than we thought. So we ran into a lot of bugs, a lot of issues, and yeah, we should have just added it a lot earlier into the process.
Despite these issues and the less than ideal ways that we overcame them, we still made a game that we are very proud of and is still very fun to play. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, hold on, not turning. All right, and now up next, Team 12 with their take on the flashy pinball classic, Devil's Crash.
Stand up. All right. Hey guys, good afternoon. We are Chris's Crash. We are the remake of the old arcade pinball game, Devil's Crash. I'm Ida, I'm the producer and programmer.
I'm Melody, the programmer.
I'm Orion, another programmer.
I'm Justin, an artist.
I'm Zijin, an artist.
Okay, so here's a demo of our gameplay. So Devil's Crush is an arcade pinball game, and the key things that we really saw and wanted to keep was the vertical level layouts with several sets of bumpers, the side rooms with enemies, and the enemies that you could kill to gain points.
So what we first did when we met up was that we made a whiteboard brainstorming session about what we want to implement, what we want to take away from the original game. And then after that, we made a work document about what we can do before interns, what we can do after, and have any other ideas that we wanted to include.
Okay, so we're going to start with art. Here's some cover art for the game that features the player fighting one of our bosses.
All right, so here's some backgrounds. We low-key skipped like the concept art phase. When we got home on Thursday, I kind of just made the sky background on your right, and then I connected that to a thunder background. You can see they kind of connect there.
And in order to make the backgrounds cohesive, I used his sky background as a reference for these ground backgrounds, and I made sure to link the backgrounds properly so that when the player moves between areas, it flows properly.
And then here's two more. On your left, there's a underground one that Zijin made, and it connects obviously underneath the ground. And then there's a space one that goes above the sky.
All right, for the tile maps, so these tile maps are recolorable for each section. One thing we wanted to keep in mind, we wanted to avoid mixels. So we decided on a pixel density for the background, and then kept that pixel density for the 8x8 tiles.
Here are some sprites for our game. You can see that's our character. We replaced the ball in pinball with like a little knight. And then, since our game is called Chris's Crash, there's Chris's carriage, and it is crashed into a tree. So here are some of the enemy designs. They're just scattered around the map, and they serve as point bonuses and as obstacles for the player. We decided to make most of them flying enemies because we want them to be mobile, and we also want to make them easily hittable from below, unlike grounded enemies. Here are some of the animated assets. This is a black hole that's used in the Chris Klug fight. This is a cloud bumper that bumps the player around. Here's a portal that transports the player between areas. And here is a coin that the player can collect for points. So when we're designing the bosses, we decided to theme them around the TAs. This one resembles Derek and Michael the twins as a, as a two-headed snake. And I also made one based off of Sky, our art TA, which is used in the Thunder sub-area. And then here is a skeleton based off of Colin. Colin also does the voice acting for the skeleton, and all of the TAs actually voice act their own characters. And then here is Chris Klug as a giant asteroid that can open his mouth and attack you.
Okay, moving on to programming. So this is day 0. We just based prototype pinball. This is going to be the core of our game, so we want it to feel really good. We did this using Unity's built-in physics system, rigid body 2Ds, box gliders, and we basically tweaked a lot of settings, added a script on the ball to control that, and it ended up feeling really nice. Moving on, the second core concept we really wanted to get was the enemies. So here you can see triangle, circle, square. Triangles patrol within a random radius, just moving randomly. Circles move between points in a circle, and squares will just follow platforms.
The next thing we started to do was add in more of the UI and different screens that we wanted in our game. So we started off by creating the start screen, as you can see here, which is basically just what you see when you first open the game with a play and an exit button. We also animated the background a little, so there are shooting star particles. This is a panel that shows up when you click play, and it basically just tells the player what buttons you can use to control the paddles. You can also see that the score and lives are displayed on the top left corner. We also implemented a settings function so that the player can pause the game at any time to their convenience. They can also change up the volume of both the music and the sound effects separately, as well as invert the control of the paddles. The last thing that we have is our end scene, which displays your score and also your high scores that are saved to your device.
Okay, moving on to bosses. So the first boss here is the skeleton boss. This is a really cool boss. We use inverse kinematics to move the arms around to different points. And basically the goal is to use the forearms, which have colliders, to block the player from hitting its head, which is the weak point. You can either choose to hit the arms repeatedly, breaking them and allowing you to go through them to hit the head, or you can try and dodge them and go around it. Next up, we have the TA Sky. So this is the Storm sub-area boss. This is an interesting boss. What it does is it moves around from point to point and will put down these clouds, which the player hopefully bounces off and dies. Finally, we have the boss everyone's been waiting for. This is Chris Klug. So Chris has 2 attacks. He has the black hole attack, which he spews out black holes across the screen, which drag you in and can really mess you up and throw you further down. He also has an attack where he will spew out enemies. These enemies serve to distract you from the main boss and also block you from hitting him when he is vulnerable and idle.
So we already had a general idea of what we wanted to do for our level layout from the basic pinball design. However, when we started implementing this into our game, we found that there were some issues with the paddle and the sizing. If the paddles were too close together, then the ball had issues getting up, advancing between our levels. However, if the paddles were too far, the ball would fall too easily, letting the player die. So to do this, we tried about 6-7 times with different angles and paddle sizes, and also added cloud bumpers underneath the paddles, which let the player go up but act as a collider when going down. Additionally, we also added wind channels to the sides of some areas just to help aid player movement in general.
And now onto the sound. So we made sound effects for the ball bouncing and hitting the wall, the spring compressing, and the paddles hitting the ball. Plus, we made other sound effects for coins, portals, and enemies.
I had some extra time after I finished most of my art, so I made a few songs as well. Here's an intro song that will play and it'll loop until you start the game.
And here is some background music I made for the ground level. I also made a boss fight theme song for Chris. This is Chris being angry at the player.
Oh, also, since I had extra time, I also made a theme for the skeleton boss with Colin's voice line.
I made 2 more songs. This is the Sky theme song. Sky also tried to make a bird noise for it. And then I made arguably the best song in the game. This is Derek and Michael's theme. Wait.
Okay, so what we planned for versus what we actually ended up with. So we initially planned for the ground, sky, and space levels with the storm and underground sub-areas, with the 3 bosses being Mr. Klug in space, someone in the storm area, and then a skeleton in the underground area. And what we ended up with was we actually got more done. We ended up with a whole additional area with a new TA, a new song, and a new background. We also ended up changing. We were initially planning to connect both of the sub-areas by portals, as you can see for Sky and Derek and Michael, but we ended up just connecting it directly to the level. Overall, really good.
Some issues that we had throughout the project was, firstly, perforce. We had some issues syncing up programmers and lost a few functions because of that, such as exploding coins that goes when the boss dies. We also tried to implement a zero gravity function in the space area where you fight Chris. However, when we did put it into the game, we found out that the ball movement becomes really, really weird and just makes the game really hard and weird to move in general. We also missed some damage indicators for some of the bosses and had hoped to implement more sound effects here and there as well.
What did work was mostly our communication. We used Discord, so we could have a bunch of different channels to sort what we were doing, and he could ask for iterations really fast, and we'd get that done. We used Box to sort all of our files. We also had really good team building. We got dinner a bunch of times. We played Roblox a few times.
Yeah, thank you so much to our mentor, Derek, and just everyone else who made this program such a great experience. Thank you for listening.
All right, up next, the one and only Team 13 with their reimagining of the classic Ladybug.
Hello, we produced Rabbit. My name is Sophia, and I'm the programmer and the producer of this team.
My name is Jackson. I'm also a programmer.
My name is Kate. My name is Kate. I'm also a programmer.
My name's Samuel. I'm an artist.
My name is Melody. I am also an artist.
My name is Daniel, and I'm a sound designer.
So, what do you think of when you think CMU? Do you think about how they're #1 in computer science? What about being located in Pittsburgh, where there can be heat waves in the middle of thunderstorms? How about the food? I kind of like the dining here. Well, according to CMU students, it's the local rabbit population. So our game was Ladybug, which is similar to Pac-Man, with the one main difference being that you can change how the map looks with these rotating doors. So we decided to reimagine Ladybug using one of CMU's biggest, brightest qualities, its rabbit population. And we developed this rabbit running around collecting carrots while trying to avoid various enemies like foxes, snakes, cats, and air horns, all while picking up power-ups. So here is our demo.
All right, so moving on to the art. So the main thing about this game, Ladybug, is that the art is like really simple. Like you can see from the screenshot from the original game that there really isn't much detail at all. Like the Ladybug sprite is just made of a couple pixels. So that was actually very challenging for me to be able to like describe different things like the enemies and the player with like very few details and pixels so that it's readable from a distance. So before interim and like during interim, like the first, like the really fat one, that was the rabbit. And you can see that PowerPoint, like the AI that captions it, it described it as a pig. So after changing it and reducing its detail, making it like significantly thinner, it actually classified it correctly as a rabbit. So here are a couple more sprites that I made. It's the air horn and some game elements.
Okay, so another difficulty was how to simplify complex memo into small pixelated. And also, when we're doing the animation, we also have to reference the real one and make sure that it doesn't become too ugly when we are simplifying it. So this is my fox, how it has been moving like. I am also the designer of these environments, so one of the one was how to make sure that they have a similar scene, which is season, but also look somehow differences. For example, this is what I make for the fall one, and this one is for the winter, for the summer, for the spring.
And as has been mentioned, our Ladybug is level-based, much like Pac-Man. So once you collect all the carrots, it'll go to the next level. We themed them after seasons that repeat in yearly cycle, and then once you get to winter, go back to spring, but it'll be harder. So we made a system that transfers from spring to summer, to fall, and to winter, using all different assets between them while keeping the same level layout. This is a reference of where we started at. This is, I think, day 0. We had these temporary assets, a basic UI system, and a basic maze of carrots that could be picked up. We just wanted to get the core features down. We also made the doors in this stage, but they were really buggy and didn't really work at this point. So yeah, that was our start.
Okay, so level design. When I played the original game, Ladybug, I was terrified. That game is nerve-wracking. And one thing that contributes to that mood of that game is the layout. So, meaning there is not a place in the level where you can fully escape from the enemy, like ever. So I took inspiration from these 3 images to create different iterations of the level. This is the initial design and different iterations on the final. And for enemy movement, that's another thing that contributes to the scariness aspect. So we made it so that if the player is in a certain if the player is close enough to the enemy, then the enemy starts chasing the player, and that just makes it scarier.
So we did have some complications with enemy movement, namely that the enemy was just like wandering off the map, or it was like going through walls. And for the most part, we were able to fix a lot of the issues. There's still a couple instances where things can go a little bit wrong, but it's much better than it was during interims when the enemy couldn't even move at all.
And power-ups. So to make the gameplay a little bit different, we added a speed boost power-up and a shield power-up, and also the score multiplier from the other game. And I hope I don't have to explain what those are.
Okay, so this is where we were at Interims. As you can see, it's really basic, but the main thing that we got commented on was our UI that was located on the left. This was, of course, still temporary. However, it showed the key things that were important. But we decided to completely revamp this in the day that we had to work. So now looking at the final, you can see that our UI has been moved to the bottom, and we also expanded the map. This makes the game more centralized, and then the sidebars also helped focus the player into the center. We also changed the timer to go around the map like the original game, which was because the enemies spawn based off of a timer. And we used paw prints to insinuate that a enemy was approaching.
So for player movement, the idea was that players could not move diagonally. They could only move either horizontally or vertically. And so by restricting player movement, though, we didn't have the grid in mind when we were originally designing it. And so the player movement ended up super janky, and we had to go back and fix it using some grid snapping.
For sound effects, there are 4 animals in the game and 1 air horn. So here are some examples of Nibbles, our main character rabbit. There's eating a carrot, an enemy spawn, and an enemy despawn. For each enemy, we have specific sound effects that play randomly throughout the game. For example, here's the snake, and here's the air horn. For music, I immediately went to 8-bit, because that's the game, and here's one of my ideas. This actually turned into the main theme you heard in the trailer, but as you know, it doesn't sound the same. That means I added orchestra and some nature sounds. This included some birds chirping, like leaves rustling, and I put those behind the soundtrack with flute from the orchestra and like violins to really bring out like the emotion of being outside, like with the rabbits. Each season also has a different theme, and I wanted to specify which season, so I made specific sounds for each theme. For example, this is spring. I'll skip summer. You don't want to hear summer. This is fall. And this is winter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, last but not least, we have Team 14 and their take on the classic game Rampage.
Okay, hi, I'm Piper, and I'm the producer and programmer for Team 14.
I'm Josh, the second programmer on Team 14.
I'm Dylan. I did sound design and music.
I'm Rena. I did the art. And I'm Kathy, the third programmer. Remember when Steve said, as a kid, I always yearn for the mines? Well, our game is inspired off of that.
Now, obviously, we had a lot of inspiration, but our original arcade game was Rampage. For those of you who don't know, in Rampage, you play as a giant monster going around destroying American cities. You'll smash buildings and get shot at by human soldiers, but you can't eat them to heal in retaliation. When building our game, we really wanted to make sure that the gameplay felt the same. Hang on. But we decided to hurdle the player into the mines. Instead of city buildings, you're destroying rock pillars in search of valuable ore. Bats will spawn trying to stop you from destroying their homes, and falling stalactites will dislodge when you walk under them. Not all is lost, however. There are berries at the top of the cavern that you can eat to heal. Similar to Rampage, the goal is to get as many points as possible before you die. We wanted to make sure that our game felt similar to Rampage, so we spent a lot of time fine-tuning mechanics like player movement.
Now for the player movement, I coded a simple left and right movement pressing the A and D keys, space to jump, U to climb, and W and S to move up and down while climbing. The hardest part of this process was ensuring that the player faced the pillar at all times while climbing. Furthermore, for the attack system, it's a simple T to attack and hold the up and down arrows to attack up or down seen in the original game, Rampage.
Now, it wouldn't be Rampage or Drillage without having something for the player to interact with. One of our main things were the pillars. We focused a lot on making sure that the player could walk past the pillars, but also be able to trigger climbing to give them more range of movement. We also wanted the pillars to spawn with gems to make sure that the player knew what they were supposed to attack, as that was a main part of our theme. Additionally, we wanted the pillars to spawn with cracks whenever the player damaged them, so that just as another visual indicator that the player has done some sort of damage.
All right, so I was mainly in charge of programming the enemies. We have two different types of enemies. In the top right, that's a stalactite. When the player walks under them, it will fall on top of them and attempt to hit them trying to do damage. In the bottom right, we have a bat. In this GIF here, we have the bat behavior. All it does is try to get above the player and then basically dives onto them, attempting to do more damage. I was also in charge of a lot of the behind-the-scenes programming work, like our sound manager and scene management. On the top left here, we have a little diagram of how our scene management works. So starting at our title scene, we go to our loading scene and then to our main level where the player has to break the pillars. After breaking all the pillars, the game will reset to the loading scene, increase the damage of like bats and difficulty of the level as a whole, and then go back to the main level for the player to continue playing. Once the player dies, they will go to the end scene showing them their high score and like a reset button to play the game again. On the right is our sound manager showing a ton of sound effects that we have in the game. There's even more than that we weren't able to implement in time, but this is really good for a ton of sound effects. And we also implemented object pooling for our enemies, so we can save on processing power for enemy spawning and reuse the same enemies over and over again.
Okay, so on the, on the art site, we started with deciding the art style, and we want something similar to Hollow Knight, just in between 2D and pixel art, so you don't stress your only artist out. And on Thursday night, we decided on the environment, which we made a major change by turning the pillars lighter and the background darker so that it's clear to the player you should be interacting with the pillars. For the first design, it came from Dylan, which looks suspiciously like Mario. I tried to deviate from that, and here's my second design because I want something that would attract a universal audience, not really masculine, but I did find out that it looks too cute. Like, look at Rampage, like, no. So here is our third robot, and we want something like bulky and also like killing pillars in a cave and you're a human. Like, it doesn't make sense. So that's why we had our robot, and I toned down the colors for animation because, yeah, just scope-wise. So for the animations, you should be seeing, this is my second animation. It's kind of junky just to give the robot feeling. It did take me a lot of time. For the UI, here is our Interims, and here is our after Interims. What I tried to do with a title page is I want an adventurous and like exciting feeling for the player when they're loading into the game and to attract them in general. For the post-processing and lighting, we did chromatic aberration, noise, and a little bit of camera warp for the post-processing just to give a cooler feeling, and the noise fits with the art style overall. For the lighting, also I was considering like in a cave you have a bad air quality, so that's why the lighting looks like it's misty.
Here is some of my process when I was drawing the art, and I want to talk about some of the challenges. When I was in Procreate, I did upload my art into Unity, and the colors was not it. So I did save that with post-processing, and another thing that was kind of challenging was animation. It took me a long time, but it was just a skill issue.
Okay, so the way I wanted to do sound effects was I really wanted these sounds to feel like how the art felt, sort of the same kind of vibe. And so to do this, I implemented sounds from a wide variety of sources. Some like this chomp sound effect. It did not play. Well, some I recorded as Foley audio, so I recorded them myself. Some I found on SoundSnap. This is a player death animation. Nope. And then some I synthesized in a digital audio workstation to give it kind of a musical jingle. Okay, and for the music, I tried to make it match how the game was playing. So the main theme is supposed to sound energetic. Yeah. It sounds energetic, and it gives off the vibe of like you're a miner in a cave, you're destroying large pillars, and it's really exciting. For the game pause theme, it's a lot calmer, but I still wanted it to be immersed within the game world, so I incorporated the main motif of the main level theme. And for the title screen theme, I made it also as energetic as the level theme, but I wanted it to have a more ominous feel to it, as like you're not sure what's going to happen, but you know you're going to be destroying rocks and it's going to be a ton of fun.
Now, after the brutal feedback that we received from Interims, we wanted to add more quote-unquote juice into our game to turn our game from a dry raisin to a plump grape. So we spent most of our... There's no more slides? I swear our game isn't as buggy as this. But anyway, we spent most of the time focusing on player feedback after Interims, and we implemented a simple score system and a combo multiplier and combo UI that hopefully you saw during the gameplay earlier that is not seen in the original game, Rampage. Furthermore, we also implemented a simple health bar. Yeah, there's no more slides, okay. Anyway, we also implemented a simple screen shake that shook the screen whenever the player hit the pillar or took damage to further enhance the user's experience. Then we simply copied the code from the screen shake and added it to the pillar, making the pillar shake a bit before falling, giving the player some kind of indication and ample time to jump off and not take fall damage.
We also added lights to the player that would flash green when they heal or red when they get damaged, just as another visual indicator for the player so they know what's happening to them in the scene.
And for our end scene, with the help of our trusty TA Jing, we were able to make a simple high scoreboard. And the neat thing about this is that it saves your score even after you close the application, making this a fun and competitive game to play with friends and family. I challenge you guys to beat Jack's score of 20K. Well, okay, so, do we just, okay. Anyway, despite our presentation not being as we expected, I hope your yearning for the mines are still there. Come play Drillage, guys.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Thank you, everybody, for coming here and supporting each other. I think that went really, really well. Thank you to anybody who tuned in on the stream at home. So that's about all we needed to do today. We would like to encourage you, however, to go back up to your project rooms and take a little walk around and show off your games to each other. I heard people talking earlier that you guys, you hadn't played some of each other's games. So yeah, go take a little bit and go do that. The TAs need to confer on important matters in private. So get out of here.